Hello, it is July 1st. Half of the year is behind us, but half of the golden age of America is not behind us yet, and that's a good thing. Happy summer to everyone. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act has just passed the Senate with J.D. Vance, our vice president, breaking the tie 51-50. You had three Republicans cross over and vote with the Democrats, all for various reasons. Rand Paul, I noticed, was one of the no votes. Some of the others were not surprising. I'll pull those names up here in a second. I think it was Murkowski and maybe Collins. I'm not sure, but I'll pull that up. No, Tillis out of North Carolina was the other no vote. Murkowski, Tillis, and Rand Paul. I'm sure all for their various reasons, especially Rand Paul, completely different from the other two on the political spectrum. But I think it's important that we kind of look at what's going on with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act now that it's left the Senate, going back to the House. We'll talk procedurally, but we're just going to focus on energy and environment because that's what we work on. That's our space. So no issues on, we're not going to talk about Medicaid or anything like that because I quite honestly don't know, and it's not my bailiwick. So, but I want to bring in our panelists now. Trisha Curtis, CEO of PetroNerds, host of the PetroNerds podcast, economist for the American Energy Institute, and Steve Milloy, legal fellow at the E&E Foundation, board member on the American Energy Institute, long time inside the Beltway, would you say, Steve, or close to
I'm
being
actually
inside
a little outside the Beltway.
as far away from the contagion as possible, but in the metropolitan area of Washington, D.C., and been shaping policy around Washington, D.C. for decades, I would say, and pretty influential when it comes to EPA, energy and environment policy. Advised the first Trump transition team in 2016. So welcome, Steve. I'm going to kick things over to you. And I know we're literally, I had planned this, and we've got breaking news since I planned this, with the bill passing the Senate. Kind of where are we now with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, other than it being big and maybe not so beautiful?
Yeah. Well, so this thing has been really hard to follow from the beginning. I mean, as far as energy and the environment and climate go, the big thing is the Green New Scam spending, which of course everybody knows President Trump campaigned heavily on and has repeatedly campaigned against. I don't think there's anything more in the world he hates more than wind. He trashes it every chance he can. So he has promised to get rid of the Green New Scam spending. Just recall that there was about $1.2 trillion worth of wind, solar, batteries, EV spending in the original Green New Scam, as per an estimate of Goldman Sachs. Biden spent about $200 billion of that between the 2022 enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act and the time he skedaddled, throwing gold bars, off the Titanic, as in the video. And so then the House went to work. President Trump issued executive orders commanding everyone to get rid of the Green New Scam. And the House passed its bill, I guess now, what month was that? May?
Yeah, the House sent it over. Yeah.
And the House, it's a part of the money that Biden spent, he spent buying Republican politicians. There was probably $64 billion spent in just 7 battleground states in 2024, and a lot of red states got money. And, that purchases a lot of politicians. So the House was only able to whack back about $500 billion worth of Green New Scam subsidies. And of course, these are just rough estimates. No one really knows. So then it went over to the Senate, and everyone expected the Senate to, squish out, but they actually, for a while, had come out with something a lot tougher. And until today, it looked like
last night got axed.
What's that?
It got axed last night, right? All the great stuff on wind and solar got
crushed. Yeah, whatever got added in. I mean, just within the last 24 hours, it looked like there was going to be, some Green New Scam spending, but not much. I mean, basically had to be in service by the end of 2027 or around then, something like that. But it looks like what has now passed the Senate, there's been an escape clause added to the, must be in service by 2027. All you need to do is spend basically invest about 5% into whatever your green new scam project is, and it can be a recoverable investment. It doesn't have to be 5% out of pocket for sure. And as long as you do that, then you're going to be set to go until 2030 or so, and you'll be collecting subsidies until, as Alex Epstein puts it, Donald Trump is 94 years old.
I
So,
joke that'll be when he exceeds FDR in his time in office.
yeah, yeah, and of course, as we all know how Washington works, when you start to phase this stuff out, it's really easy in subsequent, mega legislation that we're not in regular order anymore. We're in this garbage order where we just have these mega bills, which no one can read, no one understands, no one knows what the impact is. So it'll be really easy in the future to sneak whatever spending got cut out back in, especially if it's only been um, phased out. So now it's going to go back over to the House, where, as I mentioned earlier, they had cut out like half, which was not great, but it's half, and we do need the tax cuts, which are all important. And so where I'm going to come out on this is that I don't know what's going to happen in the House. I don't know what's going to when it go to conference. I don't know if the bill's even going to pass. I'm thinking that we should just pass because we need the tax cuts. And what needs to happen then is President Trump is going to need to, through his executive order, executive authority, roll back the green new scam spending. And we can talk about that if people are interested. But I think that's going to be the way to go. He's committed to it. There is a simple way to do it. He's got the executive orders all in place. He just needs to pull the trigger.
Well, before I hand over to Trisha, because I want to hear from the economist on what the economic impact of this means, I do want to say there's like some breaking news that GOP rep Andy, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Odles, Odles. I apologize to the congressman. Hope we haven't had a chance to meet, but he has just filed an amendment to delete the entire Senate bill and replace it with the House version they passed weeks ago. So we'll see what happens there, but just some kind of breaking news that happened just 6 seconds ago. So that's great. Trisha, what's the economic impact? How are things looking on the energy space? I mean, is this how we get to affordable, reliable energy, or is this energy weakness?
Absolutely not. We're not getting to affordable, reliable energy through any of these. And I think I want to say one thing about like how the market's perceiving this. Because if you're watching the stock market right now, whether you're watching, Bloomberg or CNBC, what you're hearing, especially on CNBC, is that basically it's going to get passed, right? The market keeps rallying in the last couple of weeks because they think this is going to get passed because the commentary is that Trump wants this so much. He's talked about this. He's continue to talk about it. And so the fact that JD Vance voted for the tie-breaking vote, even at the last minute when they, rejiggered on all this stuff at the last minute, late last night, it says something about they want to get this passed. Now, the problem I have with this is there's so much crap in it. I've tried to go through both. The first House bill is over 1,000 pages. The second Senate bill was 940 pages. It isn't written in a language that's easy to digest because it's like basically take this out, put this back in. So I read through a lot of executive orders, and actually Trump executive orders they do make sense. They're really clear. They talk about like what they're trying to achieve. And Biden's executive orders did not read that way. They were really cumbersome where a lawyer could get in there and fiddle with everything. And the problem with these Senate bills is that it's not clear. Like I wanted to go through all the energy stuff. Well, there's a crap ton of energy stuff within this bill. There's some great stuff, by the way. I don't like the title BBB. It sounds like Build Back Better, which is Biden's thing that never happened. But there is some really good stuff in this 1,000-page bill, right? There's a ton of stuff on just repealing and rescinding. And if you go through the first several hundred pages, it's repeal this, rescind this, repeal this, rescind this. So great stuff on that. Tons of stuff on methane and climate and all the BS that the Biden administration had with all the pork. That's awesome. There's also a ton of spending on military, which we need, folks. Like, absolutely. I'm wearing my patriotic earrings. It's almost 4th of July. Like, this is the American Energy Institute. We need to be spending on our military. There's a bunch of different reasons for that. This bill addresses some of those. It has things like, spending that I saw at least continuity on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. There's the $250 million spending. I believe the Senate added the 170 million or something of spending of actually refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So I thought that was great. And then I was all excited because the Senate had added this tax to wind and solar and added this foreign entity thing. that if you got, if you typed in China, you wouldn't find that in the bill. But basically, if you got parts from a foreign component, which is wind and solar is from China, that you wouldn't be able to use it, and that it had to be in service by 2027. Well, we all know that all these wind and solar things get kicked out and kicked out and kicked out, and so they never get actually in service. And so it would have basically killed these. And so what you had, and we should talk about Elon Musk, is Elon Musk just like ranting and raving and losing his absolute everything, because he was going to lose. And I believe in the Senate version he still is losing, and unless something's changed right now, he's still losing a ton of subsidies on EVs. And Trump has been out on TV talking about that, saying, hey, yes, he's mad because we're going to lose subsidies on EVs. We absolutely should be losing subsidies on EVs. These battery components come from China. Tesla, as much as I think Elon Musk did some good things with Doge, he's heavily embedded with the Chinese government. But, he's slamming, yesterday he was slamming this bill because it was investing in de-investing in future energy and investing in old energy. And that really makes me angry, because he was on the campaign trail with Trump. Trump was very, very clear about, we are investing in oil and gas and traditional fuels, and this is what's going to drive America. And so what I hear from the stock market is a lot of this commentary, like the pundits that come on Bloomberg, they're saying, look, this is the problem, we have, is that this administration is investing in stuff of the past. And they literally talk about all the stuff the Democrats are going to have to do when Trump's out of office. They're going to have to invest in all this new tech and clean tech and everything, because we've lost all the investment and we're going backwards, and climate change is going to be a disaster. I mean, it's all such a load of crap. It's unbelievable. And so what drives me nuts is no one's getting up on TV and explaining clearly that your energy bills are going up because wind and solar is getting shoved into your grid. And if we can stop that, we can take your energy bills down. We can get natural gas and coal into your grid, and we can lower your energy costs. And by the way, we're going to lower emissions too. And emissions is not the big fight. And you're not going to fight emissions because China's just going up and up and up. So you know what? You're going to have to get over yourself with climate change, and you're going to have to move on to the issues of the day, which is powering your country and powering your household. And by the way, it's cost 60% more to own a home right now than it did 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, sorry, from COVID, largely because of utility costs and because of taxes and inflation. And so I did disagree with Trump a little bit. We do have some real inflation, and energy is one of those damn sticking points. So Steve and Jason, you can take that however you want to go. We can go deeper. But Steve, how exactly does he? So if this bill passes, which it sounds like on the market that it's going to get shoved through, and he's going to pass it because he wants to say we have got to win, how does he actually roll back all this crap spending from in this wind and solar stuff? How does he actually do that?
We lost you, Steve. I don't hear you. There we go. I got you. Oh,
that was great, Trisha. I agree with everything you had to say there. As far as how Trump rolls this back in case, well, whatever happens in these bills, because I don't think very much is going to happen on the Green New Scam. There's this, he issued an executive order in April that said any regulations that run afoul of recent Supreme Court decisions can be terminated without public notice and comment, which means that they can just flush them. And so the one that underlies all the Green New Scam spending is EPA's endangerment finding. And that's where the Obama EPA determined that emissions of greenhouse gases are a threat to public health and welfare. That regulation was without congressional authorization, so much so that they had to go to the Supreme Court. And there was a famous Supreme Court decision in Massachusetts v. EPA that said EPA could regulate greenhouse gases. And of course, the Obama EPA did. Well, just a couple of years ago in 2022, the Supreme Court issued the decision in West Virginia versus EPA, which says when it comes to major questions, major issues, major regulatory programs, EPA can't do anything unless it has express authorization from Congress. So since it doesn't have express authorization to issue emissions regulations, regulate power plants, then it can't. So those are illegal regulations. So President Trump could terminate those regulations today without notice and comment. And since there's no more underlying scientific or factual basis or rationale for Green New Scam spending, just don't cut the checks. And
okay, so basically they can pass the bill and that just gets nixed out.
Well, Trump today could end the spending. Just don't issue the checks. I mean, get rid of the endangerment finding and don't issue the checks. And whatever Congress says, who cares? Because I just don't have much confidence that if this bill passes, anything good is going to come out of it, really, other than the tax cuts, maybe some other stuff, but mainly the tax cuts. As far as the Green New Scam, I'm really, we'll all forget about it, and the wind, solar, EV battery lobby will go back to work and get everything reinserted, very quietly, and we'll never hear about it. So I think really, if I mentioned this earlier to someone, if President Trump had the guts to drop 30,000 pound bombs down the shaft of a nuclear facility, we can get rid of illegal regulations too.
Yep.
It'd
That's a
probably be
really,
a lot easier.
I like that a lot. Jason, can we get into a little bit of that, of the Wall Street Journal article and this? You both are talking about all this crappy spent, the stuff that's getting shoved in, and this wind and solar lobby and Murkowski and all these, buying off. Steve, you explained it really well, buying off these politicians. But isn't it a little more deep than that? That you're also buying? It's the only people making money on this stuff in these states, and I hear this all over the place, right? I heard this in D.C. years ago that you're never going to get a roll back the Inflation Reduction Act because those Republican states want it now. And you hear this from North Dakota, and you hear this from places of, oh, well, our wind and solar. It's going to be a couple millionaires making money on this crap, because it's not going to everyone else. Like, nobody makes money. Like, they're buying these components from China. Somebody from the business side is making money. Excel is really mad that they're going to lose their subsidies, and they're going to put the cost increase onto the consumer, which they've already done. So it seems to me like there's something that we got to pull this back, of the corruption between the politicians and the business leaders who are advocating for these wind and solar tax credits.
Yeah, I think there's a myriad of things that you can talk about. Is it Paris commitments that have been forced by the likes of BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, that these companies are having to, comply with, or they're going to get their compensation cut? Is it the education? I know Michael Lucci at State Armor just published a report recently talking about how that the Energy Foundation China, this nonprofit, that's receiving money from the CCP, that is funding research institutions, that is funding higher ed, that is funding nonprofits under the guise of a nonprofit and driving a certain narrative. And that's certainly definitely a piece of this. But then as someone who's served in a legislative body as a representative, the lobbyists were coming and talking to me about all the jobs that were being created, all the economic development, and thousands of jobs. And I see someone here engaging with Alex Epstein on X today, and it's like, how many more thousands of American workers do you want to lose their jobs? And this is something that it took me like a leaving office to realize that, wait, all these jobs that are created, is that really an economic benefit? Is it or is it inefficient? And you think about it, renewables require 8.3 times more workers per unit of energy than fossil fuels. So imagine, I try to draw a visual analogy, a metaphor. You go to Chipotle, you go to Subway, you go somewhere where you get food and it takes one person to prepare your food. Imagine 8 people preparing your food, and then you pay over $100 for lunch. And you're like, wait, why is it so expensive? But you're supposed to feel good because of all the economic development and the jobs you've created. Well, you can't afford your lunch. And it's just an inefficient use of labor. And you look at solar, I mean, it's hundreds of more jobs, but the average, when you consider wind, hydropower, biomass, it's 8.3 times the number of jobs required to produce equivalent amount of energy from hydrocarbons. And that number actually it gets higher if you add in nuclear, because nuclear is one of the most efficient, fewest number of employees. So that's efficient. And that's what America has been about. We produce things more efficiently. And here we are, we're going down this avenue of not producing energy efficiently, and it's energy that's not reliable when we need it the most. And so I think we've got to do a better job of educating the policymakers. And that's why I'm trying to get a report out to educate members of Congress about how inefficient these forms of energy are, in coupling that with other research that's been done by the Texas Public Policy Foundation that show subsidies from 2010 to 2023 that overwhelmingly favor wind and solar. And so here we are, we're heavily subsidizing inefficiency. That's not any way to do a business anywhere at all. And so we've got to pull these back. I'm a little dismayed by some of the headlines in Reuters saying that this bill takes a massive axe or sledgehammer to so-called green energy. I don't think it does. If it takes out that placed in service date that Steve was talking about in the opening, which is so important, it has to be placed in service. and it needs to be placed in service before the end of the Trump administration to receive the benefits. That's absolutely critical, because if not, the can will just continue to get kicked down the road.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, I think, Marco Rubio in the last Congress introduced a bill to prevent $125 billion worth of solar tax credits going to communist China. Not only is it's bad enough that we're sending that much money to communist China, who is our enemy, but we're making ourselves that much more dependent on our enemy. If that much more of our electricity grid depends on China, oh my God. And of course, there was that story where the Chinese have inserted components that can talk back to China so that maybe China can control the solar panels at the same time. As to the jobs that Jason was talking about, I think it's wrong to focus on the number of jobs. Yes, there are more jobs maybe in the solar industry than the coal industry, but the coal industry workers are much more, Jason said, efficient, obviously productive. We need productive jobs, people that are contributing to our economy. And if we are having, 8 times the number of restaurant workers or 8 times the number of energy workers producing the same amount of, whether it's food or energy, whatever, I mean, that is just not an efficient use. Those people are going to be making less money, which is not good. They're not going to be doing anything productive for America. We need productive people. There's no upside to any of this green crap.
Yeah, and we maybe are beating the dead horse with this one, but this jobs thing drives me nuts, because we always hear a ton of it, right? Is like, this is jobs, this is jobs. If you've been to California and you went there and tried to get Chipotle right after they passed that really big increase on minimum wage, it made literally Chipotle unaffordable. It was like $35 for a salad. And so people stopped buying it, right? So that you see the implications to this. And so, when you think about jobs, go visit a coal mine in Wyoming and you'll realize there's a handful of people running this, because it's so lean. It has to be lean and efficient, because they've nearly bankrupted the industry. And so I'm frustrated when, a little bit of, where we talk about subsidies, wind and solar, when we talk about subsidies, they cannot stand on their own. So the industry, so these rich millionaire people with these wind and solar companies are buying these components from China, getting subsidies, your tax dollars, you are paying for this. And then they are making these people very, very wealthy. And look at the people hanging out with these people. These are the people in Boulder. These are the people in Denver. These are rich, wealthy people hanging out with these lobbyists and advocating for this crap. And once it gets into your grid, after they've subsidized it and bought it from China, which is all made with coal-fired power generation, which is all made with forced labor, which is why they're able to do so cheaply. By the way, it's not made very well. Solar panels from China are crap. They deteriorate over time, which means you are going to have capital refreshment costs. So if you're banking on your grid being on solar, you're in trouble from China. And then it's a win-win for them, because you have a bad grid, you have intermittent power. But then once it gets into the grid, that's the real problem, is that, and Jason, you've talked about this so much before, and I think this is what we have to beat into Congress, is that if you are subsidizing this, once it's these power purchase agreements, everyone's going to buy it, right? They're going to say, okay, I won't wind and solar because it's subsidized. But then once it gets into the grid, then all bets are off, right? And then the cost escalates, because wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun does not shine all the time. And so these are really crappy, intermittent, non-dispatchable forms of energy, and the consumer and businesses pay dearly. And it's so important, because if we think we refine 18 million barrels a day of crude oil, we produce things. We want to reindustrialize our country. You do not do that with wind and solar. And so it is amazing when you're looking at Europe right now, and they're talking about increasing spending for military because of the NATO stuff that went through, because Trump pushed that. They're not going to be able to build this or make bullets or have ammunition or make tanks on wind and solar power. You just don't manufacture on that. I mean, there's no country in the world that manufactures on intermittent, poor crap form energy. I mean, Think about it. Plants are the only thing that gets energy from solar. Plants. And they don't move. They don't make things, okay? Like, they give us food. That's it, right? And we should be thinking that use the sun for food, but okay? Don't use it to power industries, okay? This is just Bananaville, and I'm making Steve laugh, so hopefully people are laughing as well. But I'll stop there, and then we should just talk about the oil tycoon, the Wall Street Journal article, because I think Bud Brigham is an absolute hero. And I just can't say enough good things about Bud right now.
Well, just let me add on something you said. You raised a very important point. So wind and solar and EVs and batteries, all the stuff that comes from China, not only do we subsidize it as U.S. taxpayers, and that is an existential subsidy in and of itself. Look at how hard they're fighting against, getting rid of the Green New Scam. But there's also this other huge subsidy in China, the slave labor, low wage labor,
Yes,
whatever they want to call it. I mean,
we
my
hear
God,
forced labor. Yeah.
yeah, forced labor, slave labor, it's immoral and it's a subsidy. And so it's got these two subsidies and it still makes electricity prices go up. I mean, it's totally insane.
And if I'm the Chinese, I love that, right? I love that I am
Yeah.
using forced labor and coal-fired power generation, and you are buying my product from me for the opposite reason, right? I'm causing, increasing global CO2 emissions. You're buying my product that I'm subsidizing, and I'm not subsidizing. These are not input costs for the Chinese, right? They're means of competition. If they can use forced labor and coal-fired power generation and make it, and they subsidize it much further, you can actually start a biotech company and get free rent in China right now. So they do this so they can dominate these industries, and so that your ability to compete or the barriers to entry are so high that you can't. And so if you think this is about wind and solar, it's about knocking out your major competitive industries like auto manufacturing, and so that Ford is not around 10 years from now. And it should be a wake-up call. If you build something in America, you should be advocating strongly against wind and solar in your grid, because you need reliable dispatchable power, and you need to be able to compete head to head now with China, but also in the future. God forbid we actually have a kinetic war, which we probably will at some point down the road, and it is the private industry that actually supports the military. Like, it is these manufacturers who are going to help us build ships and ammunition and everything, which, by the way, there is some stuff in the bill that talks about that, of making sure we invest in our industry. So energy is core to it's core to the economy, but it's completely core to manufacturing.
Yeah, China won't have to build aircraft carriers. They can just build solar panels, send them here, sabotage them with the little, device that allows China to control it, and our grid is gone.
Yeah, and that's catastrophic. I mean, you look at what happened. I think it was Camp Lejeune military base had a battery backup system, battery energy storage system on base. They realized that it had some Chinese communication components in it, so they turned it off, and China turned it back on remotely. I mean, if that's not alarming, I don't know what is. They've infiltrated our military installations, which is quite alarming in and of itself. So, you know, you talk about building ships. I wonder if they're going to be building the Morning Midas. I don't know if you saw that story last month. The Morning Midas carrying 800 EVs caught on
Oh,
fire,
boy.
and it's so funny. The article on this said that it hasn't been confirmed. There's no reports of a ship catching fire because of EVs. And then it says that the insurance provider said that storage of lithium batteries caught on fire on the ship and caught. I was like, guess what's storing those lithium
Yeah.
batteries? It's the EVs themselves. But 3,000 over 3,000 vehicles at the bottom of the ocean, along with I think 800 EVs and the ship. The ship finally sank a couple of days ago. That's how we're getting rising sea levels, is when you put 3,800 vehicles in a ship at the bottom of the ocean. The water displacement. So climate change is causing everything.
Well, the only ships that are sinking are these ships carrying EVs. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, they don't know the cause of any one ship sinking, but when you have three of them, or
yeah, you're
however
right.
many it's
China
been,
doesn't need missiles or battleships. They just need vehicles
no,
on our.
the Jacksonville, Florida airport went up recently. One of the parking garages because of an EV, a BMW, and none of this stuff really makes the newspaper. Your Camp Lejeune story, what a great story! Was that
Oh,
in the
incredible.
newspaper anywhere?
Yeah, no,
Well,
brushed
well,
under.
I think the AEI, and this is where, Jason, you do such a good job with this, and this is where I'm happy to be involved, because I think that we don't expose enough of the lobbying, and I think that the EV sector. I mean, look at Elon Musk out and really angry about this, because he's going to lose these subsidies, and his business is dependent upon this. Now, he's done all kinds of other businesses and stuff that are subsidized as well, but the EV side of this, just the electric vehicle lobbying, to get these subsidies, is huge. And you have to realize that China does a really good job as well. They lobby people. They bring people into their country. I mean, you think of the banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, wealth management. You still think Starbucks is thinking about selling off their Chinese component, but until they do, those people are all really susceptible. And so it's no different than just basic lobbying for, wind, solar, and EVs. The same thing goes for China, is that, hey, you get a tour of China, you get talked to nicely, you get wined and dined, and then you are a friend of China, and so you advocate on their behalf. So we all know that this comes from forced labor, that this is really bad, that once it gets into our grid, it's bad. But we have a lot of folks on the lobbying side that always cool it off. When people get upset about China, they always tamper that down and say, the fact that we look the other way when when we can turn something off and they turn it back on. I mean, that's insane. I mean, it's like the balloon incident over the US, that the fact that we weren't up in arms over this or that we didn't have a report. No, the Chinese government just basically called up Biden or whoever was running the country for Biden and said, hey, we would get really upset about this report, this balloon report. So don't release it. And you know what? They didn't release it. You know what, Trump? I would like you to release the balloon report. I want to know about this balloon. Just because, if nothing else, I want people to get upset about this. I want them to realize that they're a major adversary and that we got to take this seriously. And this is the one thing I think this is where educating, I think, folks on the Hill, which Jason, at least we're going to try to get out to DC at the end of August or beginning of September. And I want to educate folks on the Hill and talk honestly about energy, is where this stuff comes from. And when it gets into your grid, the cost, it goes up. These senators and these people need to realize that they're asking for inflation. Like, they're guaranteeing inflation in their grid, in their states, in Colorado, across the board. If you're putting wind and solar in your grid, you're giving inflation to your consumers. You're making it unaffordable to invest there and to live there. So I think that's the stuff that needs to be explained, is that they're going to be unaffordable if they keep adding this wind and solar into their grid.
I mean, I encourage you guys to go on the Hill and lobby. Good luck. I live in Washington. I just stay home. But we're fortunate that we have the one guy in history that has the guts to speak out against the Green New scam, has the power to do something, has ordered his administration to do something, and now it's time to do something. And forget Congress. I mean, you need Congress for the tax cuts for sure, but you don't need Congress to kill the Green New scam. He could do that on his own. We've cut USAID spending. We're going after Harvard. We're dropping bombs. We're doing all these things that anger leftists to no end. So let's just do this one other thing, which will really anger them and put us out of our misery, or put the Green New scam out of our misery.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think the chances are that the House will put that back in, the placed in service date back into the bill, regardless of what the Senate parliamentarian thinks?
I mean, there's some chance of that. The driving force here, though, is the tax cuts, right? And we need the tax cuts, and that's really all that matters to the president, the tax cuts. Because if we don't get the tax cuts, it could be ugly next year for Republicans. So we need the tax cuts. We need to be able to say that we stopped the largest tax increase in history. So all bets are off. I don't know what's going to happen. That's why I'm so hoping that the president realizes the power he's given himself and just exercises it.
Yeah. No, he is certainly in an incredible position. I mean, made some statements last week and Tillis announced he wasn't going to run for re-election out of North Carolina. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to win an election when the president is as popular as he is against you. I think his approval ratings are at 46%, expected to be up at 48% over the next couple of days. Incredibly high approval rating for a sitting president. And you're talking, Steve, about the tax cuts from his first administration. Just to listeners may not be aware.
Well, I mean, the major feature, right? The major feature of the One Big Beautiful Bill is extending the Trump tax cuts from the first administration. And if we don't do that, I believe taxes are going up by $4 trillion, $4.5 trillion, something like that. Thousands of dollars for the average household every year. And of course, we don't want that to happen.
No, is that where some of the Senate, the budget office is coming back with the cost on this bill, is because the revenue's not going to be coming in because they're extending those tax cuts? Is that where the cost? It seems like I saw something.
Yeah, I think there's controversy, but there's a good editorial in today's Wall Street Journal about this. CBO says it's like a $4 trillion hole or a $3 trillion hole, and it's actually a $500 billion, a plus. And of course, all these numbers are funny money. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we definitely don't want taxes going up. So that's what's so important about everything.
Yeah.
So it's like the $3 trillion they said over the course of 10 years. And that's what you keep hearing if you're watching the market. That's what they're talking about. What's interesting is you're not seeing that in like bond yields. Like you're not seeing, we're not like every time people get really nervous about the deficit and everything, you usually see like the 10-year treasury pop up, and we're not seeing that. So we're seeing a kind of, this cooling off where people are like, okay, this is going to get passed and it's going to be fine. So the market's telling you they don't actually think it's going to be as problematic. Now, it is interesting because in the first Trump administration, all the tariffs, they were one off. You did not have real inflation. You had lower energy prices, and then you had these tax cuts, which businesses like mine, I changed, and you got a tax benefit, right? And you incentivize businesses, you incentivize hiring. So those huge things that happen, but that was on the back of an Obama administration where you had just very slow growth because you had very leftist policies. And so now we're in kind of a different world where you have massive inflation that you had under Biden, and all this pork and all this spending and all this craziness. And so Trump wants to lower inflation, he wants to lower bills for people, but the problem is then so he, one, needs the tax cuts, but two, he wants to lower the deficit. And so one of his means of thinking about that is we lower interest rates, and then we lower the bill that we're paying on our interest that we're paying, which is over $1 trillion, which is basically over our military spending right now. And the problem with that is that, and I'm a proponent of many of Trump's policies, but if you lower interest rates, you are going to cause inflation. It's just that there's just a reality. We'll have that. So, I mean, inflation is a really big problem here, and people don't realize that. The reason I have to emphasize it as an economist is that you can give all the tax cuts in the world. We may not have the same kind of boost to the economy because we have this really persistent and lasting inflation. And the consumer doesn't have, if you look at the cars right now, the average auto payment people are paying right now, I just heard it on CNBC earlier today, the average auto payment is over $700 a month. People are well over $1,000 a month. So you think about your housing bill, your utilities, just what you pay for your mortgage or your rent, your utilities, and your auto bill. You are tapped out if you're a family of four and you're making even a couple $100,000 a year. You're just not, after taxes and everything. So it's why these bills, and I think Trump knows that very well, is if he doesn't get the tax cut, we don't keep this going in place and also put, it's no taxes on tips and being able to get deductions on overtime and things like that. Those are meaningful and those could help, but I think they're going to help at the margin, not necessarily, jolt the economy. But all that matters, because without that, we don't have these proponents of growth. So if we don't have this, it could be, like Steve said, it's going to be very bad. But if we do have it, will it be amazing? I don't know yet.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be amazing either. I mean, I kind of think we're already bankrupt, as you mentioned. We're spending way more just on interest than we can afford, and I don't know what the future is. I don't know that it's a problem President Trump can solve by himself. We're kind of in this death struggle right now, where if we've got to somehow keep the economy afloat and people happy and voters happy, so that we can actually hold on to Congress in 2026, and then maybe hold on to the White House in 2028. We can't afford to allow Democrats to run the country, because as we've seen over the last since Obama, they're just a disaster, and they don't intend to run the country. They intend to run the country to the ground. Because
Jason, is this a time we can bring up? Can we bring up the mayor race in New York? I feel like we have to say that.
No, yeah.
Well, no, but you're seeing it right there. I mean, New York is now a scary place. It used to be a great city, a great town. We used to love going there. But boy, if that guy wins, what's it going to be like? I mean, it's bad enough under de Blasio.
So his name is if you haven't heard of him, it's okay, because he came kind of out of left field, literally out of left field, way left. Zoran Mamdani, Mamdani, and you're going to hear a lot more about him, because this guy, everybody in New York said he's not going to win. He can't win. It's amazing to listen to Squawk Box in the morning on CNBC, and when they are shredding him because he's an anti-Semite and he's against Jews. This is a massive problem. Like the fact that this man won the primary race in New York for mayor, and he's anti-Semitic, and he's out there campaigning and cheering on, Iranian protesters and stuff. This drives me it drives me mad. They asked him on TV. They asked him about if he would decline to condemn this, and I didn't even know the statement. It was globalize the intifada. And so if you look this up, quote, globalize the intifada, it's a statement that all these folks have made of basically getting rid of Israel, and it's a very anti-Semitic statement. He was asked to decline it, and you would think that you just won the primary, you could, this is your moment, right, to say, I live in New York, I represent 1 million Jewish people in the New York community, which is more than any place in the entire world outside of Israel. This is your moment to say, absolutely, I'm not anti-Semitic, I do not believe in globalized intifada. You know what he said? He said, that, it's not my place as mayor to tell you what to say. That's what Trump does. And, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. So that's just one, it's disgusting. We really need to pay attention to history because this is gross. But also, he's a massive, he's a socialist, he's a communist. He campaigned on and got a lot of young voters in this. He campaigned on having public grocery stores in New York, of capping rent immediately and decreasing rent and having all the subsidized housing, basically giving stuff for free. I mean, this is like a kid running for high school election and saying, I'm all going to give you a free pop, and you don't have to go to school anymore, and it's going to be awesome. And this is how this guy campaigned. And it's amazing to hear the progressive commentary, the folks from the left on Bloomberg, when they talk about this, they're like, this is what is representative of the left right now. And I thought, you got a message, right? When Trump won, was that you were too far to the left. And clearly the fact that you're just going even further. But imagine to the economy of New York, where they asked him also about billionaires, because New York has a lot of billionaires. And they asked him, and he says, oh, we shouldn't have billionaires. I think that, the wage gap is so big, and there's discrepancies, that we shouldn't have billionaires. So this is a man that doesn't believe we should have billionaires, and believes basically that that's just because it's wrong, and I thought, who are you to say right and wrong? You're okay with globalized the intifada. You're okay with, being anti-Semitic, but you're not okay with people getting wealthy. And that is just, it's just amazing to me that we've kind of allowed this to even happen. So I hear this a lot of where is the left on, where are the Democrats when all the stuff's going on with Republicans, and, all the stuff's going on between Tesla or Elon Musk and Trump. And it's amazing because they're not very loud or vocal right now, except for this, mayor race, which is just extremely alarming.
Yeah, just a couple more points on that. Kamala Harris's father was a Marxist professor. Pete Buttigieg's father was a Marxist professor. The guy who's in charge of climate in the UK, his father was a Marxist professor. Mamdani's father is a Marxist professor. As a matter of fact, he named his son after the 1962 winner of the Lenin Peace Prize, which is awarded by the Soviet Union. So I don't know what else you need to know about the guy.
It's pretty alarming. There's no doubt about it.
When Cuomo
as
is
people that are
campaigning
leaving New York, I like to
independent.
say, welcome to Texas, vote accordingly. So let's hope. It's the same thing with people fleeing California. They're doing so, and they're going to red states, and for the most part, they're voting accordingly along with those red states to have limited government policies. For the most part, I know they are in Texas. In 2016, it was those out-of-state voters, non-native born Texans, that pushed Ted Cruz over the top. So we're grateful for that in that case.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the other thing when I was in Newcastle, Wyoming, and I'm walking my dog in the evening, and I'm listening to Bloomberg, a surveillance podcast, and Andrew Cuomo is on, and he's basically sounds like a conservative. And when Andrew Cuomo, who ran against Mandami, sounds like a conservative, you're in a pickle, right? Like this is something has shifted. And so he's actually probably going to vote. He's probably going to run as an independent. And so this is why folks in New York are saying this isn't over yet. Well, I think if the Wall Street and folks don't really get their arms wrapped around this to start pushing back on this, they're going to realize they're going to have some pretty hefty changes within New York. Well, Cuomo, a disaster. I mean, he was an absolute disaster and very far left. But he's saying, he basically stated it's not safe in New York anymore. People are afraid to take the subway. I mean, it's New York City. You pass a congestion tax, so it's very expensive to drive. So you want people to take the subway, but it's not safe to take the subway. I mean, and Mandami is talking about defunding the police again. You don't even have an existing infrastructure. So it's just amazing to me that the policies of the policies of this leftist group are and the Democrats seem to be, wind and solar from China, from forced labor, from coal-fired power generation, heavily subsidized, which get into your grid and give you really crappy forms of energy, are not saving the planet. In fact, they're increasing CO2 emissions in China, and defunding the police and just letting immigrants run amok and having crime in your cities. That's the policies of the left, and it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make absolutely no sense at all.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's alarming and it's expensive. So
it's expensive. Yes.
And it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. We're spending more on electricity than ever before, and our grid is as bad as it's ever. Well, it's much worse than it's ever been. And they're getting us used to grid failure. I live in the Mid-Atlantic, and during the heat wave, we were warned that we could have grid failure. And if you were on their smart meter plans, they told you that, look, we're going to control your electricity. And that's just crazy. I mean, energy is abundant. It's cheap. it's available, affordable, all that kind of stuff. We should have no problems with energy in this country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think the United Kingdom is waking up to the realization just in the last couple of weeks, they've cut their carbon tax because they realized that residential electricity rates were rising along with that carbon tax. So now politicians, I imagine politicians in the United Kingdom probably are wearing slings over the last couple of weeks because they're sore from patting themselves in the back saying, oh, look, we cut one of your taxes. We cut one of your taxes. Completely arbitrary, does nothing carbon tax except make things more expensive. And now they're coming out looking like they're the heroes saying, oh, we've reduced this burden on you. But electricity costs through the roof in the United Kingdom, they're actually already subsidized. And so now they're cutting their carbon tax. Absolutely absurd. Pipeline might be built in New York, so we might have a little bit lower cost there. But what we've seen just in the first quarter of this year, an increase in the use of coal. So a bit of optimism here in the United States. China has been building 1 to 2 coal-fired power plants a week. You look at a chart, I think Elon may have retweeted this or re-X'd it, showing the growth in thermal generation from coal in China since 1990 compared to the United States has been completely flat. We've actually seen a decrease in thermal generation over the last 10 years, but an increase for the first quarter of this year in the use of coal in the United States. That's great for efficiency, affordability, reliability compared to last year alone. But over the last year, we've seen a pause in retirements of coal-fired power plants. Over 40 plants or units at coal-fired power plants that were slated to be early retired or decommissioned have now been put on pause because I think big tech is waking up to the realization that to power their AI and data centers, they need affordable and reliable energy. And that comes from natural gas, it comes from coal, and it comes from nuclear. And so I think there is a little bit of optimism, even if the big, beautiful bill isn't as quite as beautiful as it should be. Hopefully there will be some changes here in the House. I know I'll be reaching out to members in Congress to share some information that hopefully will get us that passed with that placed in service date before the end of the Trump administration, so that we can truly stop the production tax credit that has been distorting markets, misallocating our tax dollars, and driving up cost.
Well, Jason, we've talked about it in the past, but you've mentioned, you've mentioned like the carbon sequestration tax credits, which and the power purchase agreements and what's happening within the grid, and the fact that we want folks want that coal-fired power generation, and they want that natural gas, but they're not getting it, right? And so it's not getting built. And so it's great to me to hear that, okay, the data is showing that we're increasing coal use, right? That makes sense. Every month we increase electricity prices on average. It's well over 18 cents a kilowatt hour in the US. So we're going, and it's way more than that here in Denver. It's way more than that in a lot of other places. And so that's going up because you can chart it, and you show these charts. Is that we show the chart of coal-fired power generation declining and wind and solar power increasing, and so you're losing that base load power generation. So I think when you're increasing it in the first quarter of this year, that's telling you that that's forced, right? That you have to have that. And even in Europe, you saw that where they pull it because they have to literally turn the lights on. And so that it's positive news that we're not retiring it. I think that what we're hearing from Secretary of Energy Chris Wright is that he is cutting carbon sequestration credits or tax credits, which I think is awesome. And he's also saying, hey, I'm not for all of the above. I am for affordable, reliable energy. And essentially what he's saying is that is natural gas, and that's coal-fired power generation. And Steve, to your point, we have no excuse in this country for 18 cents a kilowatt hour. Like, that is a travesty. It is, it is just so, it's so mean to the consumer and to businesses because we have so much natural gas and we have so much coal-fired power generation, and we can actually use both. We can use them synonymously. We can use coal-fired power generation when natural gas price spikes. We just have this incredible abundance of energy, and we have no excuse. I was just looking up the latest data. We are producing 13.5 million barrels per day as of the end of April, and the data for April, Texas, you guys are at almost 5.8 million barrels per day. That's an all-time record high. That's way more than many OPEC countries. Like, that's insane that Texas is producing that. So I think that's a knock on to push back on the peak shale guys. But it's just, we have an abundance of energy, huge amounts. And so we need to be thinking a little bit more about how do we make sure we keep coal-fired power generation in the grid, how we stop decommissioning it. I did see some stuff in the big, beautiful bill in the BBB that talking about making sure we can actually mine for coal and actually mine for other minerals, which is great, but we actually have to do it.
Yeah, amen. It's critical mineral, so we have to, right? I think
Yes.
it's really important
Yes.
that President Trump changed the designation of coal to a critical mineral, which is a good thing, good policy wise. And you mentioned the Wall Street Journal, an article earlier, Bud Brigham, this the so-called the tycoon. He certainly doesn't see himself as that. He sees himself as an entrepreneur. He's a board member of the American Energy Association, which is our trade organization, the sister trade organization of the American Energy Institute. And he's been working to get rid of these subsidies. Full stop, stop the grift. He rejects the climate alarmist narrative, which these things are because of that narrative and the need for the perceived need to do carbon capture. So we're grateful to have his leadership and certainly proud of him and the work that he's supporting, including the American Energy Institute. But I'll end with the effect of man-made CO2 emissions does not appear to be strong enough to cause systematic changes in the temperature fluctuations during the last 200 years. That's from a study, a research that you can find on my Substack, jasonisaac.substack.com. I call them the MAGA Norwegians. It was this Norway study that released that last year. Now paleoclimatologists now believe that CO2 doesn't drive temperature, but vice versa. So let that sink in, let that blow your mind. The left is probably exploding right now. Keep living the high carbon lifestyle. Thank you, Steve, for joining us. Thank you, Trisha, for joining us. Intellectual conversation. I'm always glad to bring on smarter people than me that know the issues and how they affect you in your life. So like I said, keep living the high carbon lifestyle. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks,
And
folks.
Steve and Trisha, if you'll hang